and excited to introduce our guests this afternoon. John Seabrook, I've known for more than 50 years as a friend and neighbor in South Woodstock, Vermont. And my older, wiser brother, Ledley, who I've known even longer. For the few of you here today that don't know me, I'm Becky Hurlbert, Cornwall Library Board President, and I welcome all of you here today. And I'll leave the rest of the conversation to the two of you. And thank you both for being here.
So I'm Ledley, and thank you, John, for being here. John Seabrook is a staff writer with the New Yorker, longtime. He's been writing on technology and music and culture. He's the author of 6 different books: Nobrow, The Culture of Marketing and the Marketing of Culture, best-selling The Song Machine, Inside the Hilt Factory, Flash of Genius, which was the basis for the film starring Greg Kinnear and Lauren Graham, and most recently now the Spinach King, which he's here to talk about, the rise and fall of an American Dynasty that the New York Times has recognized as one of its 100 notable books of 2025. Congratulations, John. And so as Becky referenced, she's known John for 50 years. My parents, when I was 5, bought a house on South Woodstock, Vermont. And about 6 years later, the Seabrooks came and moved in next door. There was a barn that had been there for 40 head of dairy cattle, and the Seabrooks worked on it for their horses and their carriages. And I didn't get to know his parents all that well. I was just a little kid. I didn't get to ride on the carriage so much, but I did when Chris Higgins, the coachman who had been trained at Buckingham Palace, would take us out for rides. And I do want to say about Jack Seabrook, though, John's father, even though he was struck me as a somewhat intimidating person, when I moved some years ago to Philadelphia, he was one of the first people to reach out to me and send me a note. He wanted to put my name forward for the Philadelphia Club, which is the correct
It's a
club.
serious form of flattery.
Exactly. So, John, tell us about Seabrook Farms. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you very much. Really, Becky, thank you so much for making this happen. But yes, I don't need to say more, except I will just say the Laughlins are such a nice family to be connected to, and I so appreciate both the folks here today, and then Ledley's father, who was made a big impression on me as a young man, and shaped my life in ways that continue to shape my life. So I appreciate everything you've done for my family. So what I thought I would do is briefly tell the story with some slides, and then Ledley and I can kind of dive in to certain parts of it and explore those parts. So Seabrook Farms was a large frozen food company that kind of flourished in the 1950s. They were pioneers in frozen vegetables. It was located at the very southern part of New Jersey, where that star is right down there. Very few people actually go to this part of New Jersey, and you either go over the bridge and go to Wilmington and Washington down this way, or you go down to the shore this way. But this way is kind of a dead end, and it's an agricultural community. My great-grandfather, this is the way Seabrook Farms looked at its height. You can see the factory in the middle and the workers' housing. It was the town of Seabrook, New Jersey was a workers' town. Had about 6,000 workers at any one time, up to 8,000 in the summertime. The Seabrook controlled 25,000 acres of their own land, another 25,000 acres of contracted land. It really was an empire to itself, and it connected to the 20th century because it was an agricultural business, both labor and immigration, and the big issues of the 20th century involving labor and immigration touched my family and the company in lots of different ways. So this is my great-grandfather. He was born in England, came over here as a 5-year-old, and he and his family found their way down to South Jersey and started growing vegetables. The reason that New Jersey is called the Garden State is that in the 19th century, there were all these market gardens, they were also called truck farms, and they produced high-quality vegetables for New York and Philadelphia. They were kind of in a sweet spot because the land was affordable, but they were close enough to get to the major cities in a day by rail. And so this man, his name was Arthur, started growing vegetables, and my grandfather, C.F. Seabrook, was born on that farm in 1881. So this is C.F. Seabrook, my grandfather, a fierce individual. He never liked farming. He hated being a farmer, really. He wanted to leave the farm as soon as he could and find a job in a city and work in an industry. Henry Ford was his ideal. He wanted to do something industrial, but he happened to live when the farm was mechanized. Farms around the United States were mechanizing in the early 20th century, and he and his father got involved with irrigation, and then they started buying tractors, and they basically started to mechanize the farm. And at a certain point, this man realized that instead of leaving the farm for industry, he could bring industry to the farm. And so that's what he resolved to do. He resolved to build kind of a vegetable factory modeled on Henry Ford's auto factory and mass-produce vegetables. At first, they were frozen, fresh and canned. He met Clarence Birdseye in the late 20s. Clarence Birdseye had invented the quick freezing process when he had been fishing in the Arctic and pulled fish from the water. They froze instantly in the air, and then they were warmed up months later and tasted just as good as they would have if they were fresh. And he realized if he could reproduce that process in a laboratory, it would be a food revolution, and that is in fact what he did. But he couldn't quite crack vegetables, so he turned to this man who knew about vegetables, and he and his sons, one of them was my father, in the 1930s and 1940s, built the business up. So these were his 3 sons. Although he was not an educated man, he had seen to it that his 3 sons went to universities. 2 of them went to Princeton. His oldest one is the one on the left, Belford, and he was the one that really figured out the frozen food process for vegetables in the 30s. My father's the youngest in the middle. He was much taller than his father, and he was kind of the finance guy, and eventually became the kind of CEO guy. And then the brother on the right was Courtney, and he was the one that figured out the brand. After the war, Seabrooks started their own brand, Seabrook Farms, and Courtney did the marketing. So it was a family business, and it's important to the story and to the marketing that it was a family business. The father and his 3 sons all sort of working different parts of the business, and he, CF, promised his sons that they would take over the business, and that business was going to be a family business that lasted for 500 years. At some point he changed his mind, though. So the labor, let me just say something about labor. In the early 20th century, there were a lot of Italian Americans who came through the port of Gloucester and Ellis Island. They were the main labor force. In the 1920s, there was kind of a panic about immigration, not unlike the one we're having today. And the Italian flow of immigrants was cut off. So black workers came up from the south and became the Seabrook main workforce in the 30s. But the black workers weren't treated fairly, and they courageously decided to form a union and call a strike in 1934, which was an extraordinary, courageous event. My grandfather was an absolute autocrat, had never really been challenged in any way. And the fact that these black workers, as in working with some of the white workers, formed a union and challenged him is an amazing part of this story. Unfortunately, he crushed the workforce with vigilantes and armed, local police. And although they didn't succeed, the union eventually did succeed and was the first farm workers union in the East, started in 1945. During the war and after the war, the workforce became Japanese Americans who came from internment camps. 2,000 Japanese Americans were released from those internment camps, whereas most of you know they were incarcerated after Pearl Harbor, and they and their families moved to Seabrook and became part of the workforce. And then after the war, a number of Estonians were released from Eastern Europe, from displaced persons camps in Eastern Europe, and came and worked at the farm. These workers became my grandfather's kind of like main supporters, and as time went on, he would compare his son's loyalty to the workers' loyalty, and the sons usually came up short in that comparison. This was what it looked like to live in Seabrook. It's basically just a company town with barrack-style houses. There's the smokestack and the water tower in the back. This is in the 50s. Life magazine came and did a big story on Seabrook. You can see the workers wore different uniforms, and then you can see the black workers still, were outside, not in the factory. My father was married young, then was a glamorous playboy in the 50s, and one of his main relationships was that woman right there. If anyone recognizes that woman, that's Ava Gabor. And interestingly, you probably only know Ava Gabor from Green Acres, where she played a sophisticated New Yorker who came down to live on a farm. Well, she actually lived that life in real life 10 years earlier, and she and my dad had this 2-year-long relationship. So this is the family both at the peak of their kind of power, but also when things really started to fall apart. You can see that in addition to the 3 sons, there was a sister, Thelma. Thelma really wanted to work for the company, but because she was a woman, my grandfather wouldn't let her work for the company. And but she, as he got ill and started to get more difficult to deal with, she stood by him. And so my father knew Grace Kelly. This is him sitting next to Grace Kelly. The Kelly family had built the Seabrook power plant, that big smokestack. Grace's father was a builder, and so he knew Grace Kelly. And when Grace Kelly got married, he was invited to the wedding, and he got to go on the ship sailing across from New York to Monte Carlo. This is a picture of the reporters on the ship. The person he didn't know, but he was going to meet on the ship, is my mother. That's my mother right there. She was a reporter who came from South Dakota, got to New York during the war when men were away, women were given an opportunity, showed her talent as a columnist, and became a columnist for UPI in New York in the 50s. That's a picture of her behind Marilyn Monroe. She covered celebrities and fashion, and then she was invited to the wedding. My parents met at the wedding, and they had this kind of parallel romance with Prince and Grace, and there they are. And they got married about 5 months afterwards. But unfortunately, he was losing his, I don't know what was happening to him. He was slipping his cable. My mother arrived in this family and thought it was this wonderful American sort of aristocratic family. And I thought I would read to you a letter that she wrote. Her mother, they came from nothing special. They were just, they were sort of struggling to make ends meet. Her mother was back in Missouri, and her sister was she always said Missouri, not Missouri, being from there. And her sister was in New Orleans, so she would always write, use carbon paper, and write the same letter, send it to both, and then keep the carbon. So I had all her letters, and they're a fantastic part of this book. But here is, after she got to Salem and met this man and watched him in action for a little while, this is what she wrote. Jack's father is without doubt one of the most remarkable men of all time. Cunning, domineering, and spiteful beyond belief almost. I guess he will always work to undermine Jack because he resents so bitterly that Jack is running the business. He is a man whose life has been motivated by a single force: to control. He must control the people and the property around him. He knows no security except financial dominance, and he has no basis for having people as friends, only to have them kowtow to him as dependents or to oppose him and be enemies. He couldn't run the business without Jack, although I guess he would try. If I had been born as Seabrook, I wouldn't have stayed around here for all the vegetables in the world. Why all of his family has lived under his malicious spell all their lives, I can't understand. By alternating kindness with unexpected vicious thrusts, he keeps people in his orbit constantly off balance. He is fiendishly clever, and I suppose is punished more than he punishes others by the suspicious, conniving, resentful old age he is living. Yeah, she could write. And so, eventually what happened was that the bankers who served on the boards said to my father and his brothers, look, your father is ruining the business. If you don't get rid of him, we're going to call our loans and bankrupt the company. And they said, well, we can't get rid of him. He owns the company. And they said, well, yes, you can. You can have him declared mentally incompetent. And we've done that with other old fellows that got a little dotty. So, that's what they did. The sons took him to Philadelphia and left him in a sanatorium and tried to have him committed. At that point, his daughter, Thelma, said, no, this is wrong. She went and got him out of the sanatorium. He sold the business, disowned the boys, and left all the money to Thelma, who had never gotten to work for the business in the first place. Meanwhile, my father and my mother kind of went into the sunset. My father got into carriage driving, and he went on to make money in Philadelphia and became this very elegant driver of the four-in-hand coach. And I think the reason, we can talk more about this, but I think the reason he was driven to look like a king is because he had been promised the kingdom and it had been taken away from him. That's just my theory. But anyway, so that's basically the story of the Seabrooks. And I happen to be born, this is the last slide. This is my birth announcement. As you can see, I'm a product emerging from a pea pod, and I'm distributed and processed. It's rather, So this just tells you something about my family and confusion between family and business. But, I was born in the year all of it fell apart, 1959, and it sort of was my life's quest to sort of try to get to the bottom of what happened between my father and his father, to bring all this down. And that's kind of what the Spinach King tries to do. So with that, we're going to have a chat about some of this stuff. Thanks.
Thank you, John. So she should definitely do that. Is that in the book? I don't think that's in the book. Yeah, I haven't seen that before.
That was the company motto, we grow our own so we know it's good. Unfortunately, it turned out not to be good.
So, John has given us the scope of the story, the history in its briefest outline, and has hinted at, but hasn't really dug in yet on the fact that this is really a great and tragic and compelling, and it's an awful tale. It's a rather like a Greek tragedy. And I want to get into some of that tragedy, but before we even do, I want to say that in your handling of it, it's also a redemptive story, because it is a story of John doing the work of sorting through who his family is and what that means for him and perhaps for future generations. And it doesn't all wrap up in a neat little bundle. There's some change afoot in the telling of it. But before we get to the change, John refers to an original sin of corporate patricide. And you moved over fairly quickly from the handoff from his great-great-grandfather Arthur, who first started the farm, and the handoff to grandfather C.F., in which C.F. cheated his own father.
That's right.
And sold by underpaying for the property.
That's right. He got investment from New York backers when he had this idea for the vegetable factory, and then he came back and bought his father's half of the business for far less than it actually was worth. His father thought that was plenty of money. He went and retired. He ran out of money, would come back and ask for money humiliatingly, and his son wouldn't give it to him. So later, when my father and his brothers and my grandfather were fighting, he became paranoid that they would do to him what he had done to his father, and then they did, and then I did it, So there's a long history of betrayals there, I think, yeah.
So do you want to share a little bit of that portion there? Read some of the pages, the portion on 266, 67. I think that's when they're taking the steps toward committing CF.
Yeah, that was, okay. Yeah, this, this is kind of how it went down. Jack met with Jeffrey S. Smith, the chairman of Girard Bank, another of Seabrook's major creditors. Smith said that CF's refusal to renew the voting trust was not the action of a competent man. To save the company, he told my father, the family should look into having their father committed and have the court appoint a guardian to manage his affairs. Then they wouldn't need the old man's vote to extend the trust. This sort of thing happens in family enterprises, Smith assured my father. He recommended a small private sanitarium called Fairmont Farms, located in northwest Philadelphia, where another of his wealthy clients had sent Grandpa when he became difficult. A family business is the ultimate enabler, quote, according to the family business consultant T.M. Hubler. In this case, protecting the family business enabled the sons to contemplate corporate patricide. But had it really come to this, that in order to appease the bankers, they had to commit their all-powerful father? Jack consulted with his brothers. Both were in favor of committing CF. That was the only way, they assured each other, to save what he had created. Jack advised his brothers and their mother to make timelines that detailed CF's spells and frequency and severity. They didn't tell Thelma what they were considering because they didn't trust her not to alert their father. Yeah, so that's how it went down.
How did you come to see that was the original sin?
Among a few things, so my father really didn't say that much about what had happened with his father during his lifetime. He was, even though I later discovered that he had, all the abuse that he had endured at the hands of his father, he really remained sort of stoically silent about almost all of it. But the one thing that he did sort of often say was that the reason that things had gone wrong between him and his father was because of what had happened between my grandfather and his father, that there was this direct connection to that. And that was, I think, part of my motivation for trying to explore what really happened, because it was sort of clear to me that if you don't kind of dig into these traumas that have occurred, and this was really sort of obviously a very big one, they don't really go away. They have a way of kind of finding a way to kind of replay themselves, I feel like. And that's kind of what did happen. whether it was something my father kind of looked as a justification for doing what he did or not, I'm not sure. But that was very important part of the story that I was kind of passed down. That part of it, yeah.
John, throughout this, throughout the book, The Spinach King, you are in search of the truth, in search of understanding the history and what motivated people in your family, what motivated them to take certain actions. You let us know, though, early on that in your own upbringing, truth-telling wasn't always welcome. And a big part of the family had to do with, or a big activity in the family was around wine. And you
Yes.
spend a bunch of time
Yes.
talking about wine. I wonder if you'd read us that section and tell us some more about the role wine played
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
allowing or not allowing truth.
Yes, there's a pretty wide river of alcohol that runs through this narrative, and then it ended with me where the reservoir. But my family used alcohol in various ways, but they were in a big hurry to get ahead in the world and to mingle with the elite. And they really weren't born that way, so they had to sort of try very hard to pass as elite, and wine and clothes were really the two main vehicles they used for that. And so it was just always very important to my father that every occasion was marked with alcohol, and not just any alcohol, but with a special bottle that came from his cellar. The fact that our birth years were good vintages was hugely inspiring to him. He was, every toast at every birthday ended in 1959 was a very good year. I should say the problem with that is that the wine keeps getting better, and you don't necessarily keep getting better. Anyway, so yes, I write, so the dinner table and wine, initiating me into wine, it was a big part of my upbringing. I'm just going to read two paragraphs. One is about pouring the wine, and the second is about drinking the wine. This follows having a trip to the wine cellar where we pick out the wine, and then my father decants the wine. After the wine was decanted, we were seated at the oval-shaped, polished walnut dinner table. I poured. Pouring wine properly, another aspect of my patrimony, requires a symphony of fine motor skills. The right hand cradles the bottom of the decanter, while the left hand grasps its throat with a white linen napkin. Approaching the drinker over his right shoulder, the pourer's left forearm is near the seated diner's right ear, as the left hand holds the lip of the decanter over the glass, never touching the rim, while the right arm comes up to initiate the flow of wine. When the proper amount has been poured, which varies depending on the size of the glass, the wine, the number of people at the table, not counting my mother who wouldn't have any, and those like Lisa likely not to want a second glass, a calculation the pourer must make afresh with every subsequent pour. The right wrist rotates laterally, decanter neck spinning in the curved fingers of the left hand, so that the wine drips are held by centrifugal force, while the napkin in the left hand slides up to blot the lip. The slightest breakdown in muscular coordination results in spreading scarlet stains of shame on the spotless tablecloth for all to see. I was allowed a full glass of wine when I turned 13. I had a crystal flute set at my place at the table, and as a special honor, I got to try my vintage year, the 1959 Bollinger, which by 1972 was a good deal more mature than I was. Before this, I had been permitted to take small sips of champagne from my father's glass, but now I had my own.
As he poured the wine, I heard the faint whistling of breath in his nostrils and caught a whiff of his citrusy aftershave. I kept perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe, lest a micro flutter disturb the delicate procedure. Then there was a toast I can't remember, except that it concluded with, 1959 was a very good year. I took a sip. The shocking dryness of the grape practically gagged me, but I pretended nothing was amiss and took another. I felt something. What? Did anyone else feel it? I looked around. The adults were talking about what they always talked about, how the wine tasted notes of peach, white pepper, and chocolate, where the grapes were grown, and how it had rained at the right time on the 1959 crop. They talked about everything but the most basic fact about the wine, the feeling it gave you. It felt as though my good spirits had emerged from a cave in my lower jaw where they usually hid away. It was a revelation, but no one at the table spoke a word about it, and I quickly learned to conceal the feeling. That was my first lesson.
Yeah.
You noted that your mother can write. You can too.
I got it from
Thank you.
her.
So, nobody spoke of the most obvious thing. How did you learn?
Well, nobody spoke of really almost any, I mean, the obvious things like what happened with your father, why did we have to move away from where we lived? I don't think anybody, my mother, as I said, had sort of come into this life just as it was falling apart, and she had, no interest really in living there anymore. I think she was happy to move away and to just leave it all behind. And, and my father was trying to figure out what to do with the rest of his life, and there just wasn't a lot of time spent on what seemed important to me. But, I was a kid. They had, adult issues to deal with. But yeah.
So I'm wondering, do you know what enabled you to begin to ask the questions that were invariably going to shock people because you were talking about things that just weren't supposed to be talked about?
I got into this story, really thinking that I was telling kind of the heroic story of my family. When I first started collecting information about it, when I was still in my late teens probably, even before I really decided to be a writer. In fact, the fact that this story kind of hovered over my life from the beginning probably is one reason I became a writer. Just kind of having this story that I wanted to know. And the only way to know it was to sort of research it eventually. But at first I thought, this is sort of a good man. My grandfather, when he died, his workforce really celebrated him as this, not only as a great capitalist, but as a person who saved a lot of them from, well, in the case of the Estonians, they might have been killed had they not come to America, had they been left in Eastern Europe and gone back to Soviet Union or to Estonia. So, and those workers created a museum in South Jersey, which is still there, where I've been, I've been the president of the board for some years. I'm not anymore. And so there was this kind of mythologized version of the Seabrook story that was, literally set in brick and mortar. And so when I, and that was a story that I kind of grew up hearing too. And it wasn't really until I started actually, I followed my mother's path into journalism. I always thought that my mother's career, when I knew it, was just so exciting. And I also felt, I think, a sense that she gave it up too early, that she had, she left her career when she married my dad and moved down to South Jersey, and she was really just in her prime. And I don't know, I kind of feel like maybe I was sort of continuing that career a little bit. I went to New York I started in magazines. I met Lisa at a magazine, and eventually arrived at the New Yorker, and kind of learned over the number of years how to tell stories, but also how to kind of, ask questions to power that didn't necessarily want to be asked or answered. And that was really what led me into this, not as a family member, but as a New Yorker writer who took on the subject of his family, but then realized that if he was going to truly follow that investigative path and really speak truth to power, he was going to bring dishonor on his family. And that was really where it became really difficult. Yeah.
Yes.
Kind of the crux.
Yeah, so John, that's, this is, I don't know whether you labeled it this or it's just as this genre as reported memoir.
Right.
And in the book, you quote Janet Malcolm as saying, journalists justify their treachery in various ways according to their temperaments. You follow that up with Joan Didion, and one last thing to remember, writers are always selling someone out.
Right.
And then you tell us in your voice, a journalist has a duty to follow the story wherever it leads. Your only real loyalty is to the truth as you understand it. But what if your family is the story? And telling the story truthfully means exposing the family. I'm wondering how you navigated that perilous
Right.
path.
Well, I guess.
Because I feel like that's what that's a whole lot of what this tale
That is
is
what it's
about.
about.
Yeah.
I had certain advantages in that I come from a family where there are long generations there were long years between the generations, basically 40 years between my grandfather and his father, 40 years between my father and me. So a lot of stuff that, like, if there had been another couple of generations in that span, a lot of stuff would have been thrown away. But a lot of things were preserved. That was one aspect of, but also a lot of, then those people are gone. By the time I came to write it, of course my grandfather was long gone, everybody of that generation was gone, and my parents were gone too. I don't think I would have written it while my parents were living. My mother was always very opposed to me writing about the family. My father actually, he kind of liked a little bit me writing about him, although I don't think he would have really necessarily loved this book. Although I will say that when the thing that really opened up the story was when my father died. As I said, he hadn't really spoken about what really went down between him and his father. But when he died, he left me these boxes. Didn't say he was leaving them for me. It just said, save for JMS Junior. He was always keen on me using the Junior, because I didn't use it in my byline, which kind of bothered him. In those boxes were, when his father died, I said he had changed his will. His brothers tried to have the will thrown out, and there was a lot of interviews and timelines and documents produced about how my grandfather behaved in the last 10 years of his life. And they were all in these Save for JMS Junior boxes. And that was very strange, because why was my father leaving me this stuff? Having protected his father's legacy really during his lifetime, leaving it for his writer's son, knowing what I would do with it. And that was really something that I guess I was motivated by, because I felt like this is what he wanted me to do. And in doing it, I felt we were working together in this way, and it made me feel a lot closer to my father than I had during his life, Sort of like, even though it was kind of this weird revenge that I was kind of, the agent of doing it for him. I think I'll also, the other thing that I'll say about that is, you write books about people who aren't here anymore, but they're for people who are. The people who are reading them are not the people who are gone. And my children, I felt, should know this story, because as I said earlier, I think these traumas, when they aren't, kind of examined and brought to light, they can fester and work in ways that you don't really understand. The book ends with our adopting Rose from Haiti, our daughter, and that was a very transformative event for me too, because I realized that this was now part of her history, and I wanted to explain it. It was part of her family history now, and I wanted to sort of be able to explain it to her, So yeah, those were all reasons, but I often did go back to this kind of famous line that Polish-American poet Milosz said, which is, as soon as a writer enters the family is toast. And it's kind of true in a certain way, because families are not really built to accommodate writers, because the writer has his view of the family, but of course the family has a wider or multifaceted view than that writer could ever have, and I think it can be very difficult to accommodate a writer in the family. Yeah, I'll say that. And as far as my family's reaction to this, that bears that out. My family they behaved in a very waspy manner about this. You'll be surprised to hear they haven't said almost anything about it at all. My sister, so my father had two daughters with his first wife, and my sister is now 83 years old, and she lived through some of this stuff that I only kind of knew from secondhand. But she's also a crisis manager who works with families that have like a wayward child that is going to embarrass the family and bring scandal on them. And she knows exactly how to handle people like me. So she handled me beautifully. So, other than that, I haven't heard much of my family. A lot of my uncle's children and grandchildren stayed in South Jersey, and in the 80s they started up another frozen food vegetable business called Seabrook Brothers and Sons, which continues to pack the frozen cream spinach that you can see in supermarkets still, and they're still down there engaged in the business, and I haven't heard a single word from them. But I am going down there to talk in a couple of weeks, so we'll see. Yeah.
So your family's response notwithstanding, it leads me to wonder, John, and I'll ask this and then I'm going to open it up for some questions from others if they may have them. But what has changed for you? Has the writing of this book, the telling of the story, the getting at the truth, shifted something for you? And I'm wondering in part, what it means to be a Seabrook, and if you drew the arc of the patrimony, and it does seem like it would be a patrimonial arc, beginning with your ancestors back in England through the tale as you've told it. What's shifted for you, and how might being a Seabrook be answered differently now for Harry and Rose, your children, and perchance the generations to come? Do you have a sense of what?
I was angry for a lot of years about my relationship with my dad, really. Like, I just didn't have a great relationship with my dad. He was never, partly that he was, I think, he had no father model, no model for fatherhood, and really didn't know how to be a father. But, as a kid, you don't really get that necessarily. You sort of, look for things from your dad, and I just didn't get them. And I think I understand now why, and it's kind of made me at peace with a lot of the things that I was angry about, and so I think that's kind of one thing I got out of it. I'll also say that I feel like even though the family business ended when I was born, you know, I was still kind of supposed to be part of it. You know, I was supposed to. This was the next generation. This was the guy that was going to be the, you know, the leader of the company, like, you know, now. And even though there was no business to kind of lead, I always kind of felt that my position in the family had something to do with this family business that wasn't there anymore, and that my value as a son was partly calculated by, you know, what I could contribute to this sort of missing family. But there was like kind of a financial or capitalist aspect to it. I feel like my children are not going to grow up feeling that way. I mean, Harry is now writing short stories, so he's growing up, you know, wanting to be a writer, which is a whole different thing. But I think they're going to be freer to do what they want and to be individuals without feeling like they were all part of this thing they can't escape from. You know, this thing that is always going to kind of hold them back from what they want to be. So I hope that's the case with our kids.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
John, you wrote it's a beautifully written book, and the description is so vivid, and so many scenes are so memorable. And it's also extraordinary because it's a very courageous piece of work that you did, and it requires a lot of integrity and just hard work and perseverance. And I imagine others in the audience would join me in feeling that, I think that when any one of us bears witness to truth and exercises integrity, it lets a little more light into the world. And we need a little light in the world in the form of truth and integrity. And I'm grateful for your witness to that. You and I, before we got going on this, had identified a whole variety of passages that you might read from. Before I hand my mic over to invite questions, are there other passages, or is there another passage you'd like to read that is just as a teaser for the folks in the audience who still have this book to look forward to reading?
Well, I think I do want to read one little bit about family businesses, just because, I don't know, maybe some of you come from a family business, and there's sort of unique dynamics that go along with being a member, particularly like the second or third generation member of a family business. So I'm just going to read. This is really not about the Seabrooks, but just about family businesses in general. But it gives you just another kind of context for understanding or reading this book. Just a couple of paragraphs. 1 in 3 American family businesses survive into the second generation, and only 1 in 10 make it to the third. Although the idea of a family behind a business, even an imaginary family, is a time-honored marketing strategy, especially in the food sector, the enterprises that endure past the second generation almost always recruit outsiders to manage them, as is the case with Walmart, Kroger, and Tyson Foods. The psychologist Kenneth Kay devoted his career to studying the dynamics of American family businesses and the reasons why they fail. Kay identified several causes, including toxic relations between the founders' children and the hired workers, the founders' habit of both over-trusting and under-trusting his offspring, confusion of love and money, the founders' inability to let go of power, and the self-doubt that cripples the children when they finally do assume command. In a 1996 essay called When the Family Business is a Sickness, Kay observed that a surprisingly large number of family businesses in the second generation or more, in a surprising number of family businesses in the second generation or more, at least one member suffers from substance abuse. He muses on the similarities between addiction and the all-consuming demands and rewards of a family-run enterprise. Quote, like an addictive drug, the family business creates a high with delusions of grandeur and power. It creates a market for services that exploit those delusions and thereby, unfortunately, feeds the addiction. I corresponded with Kay after my first article about Seabrook Farms appeared in the New Yorker. To him, asking how a family as dysfunctional as the Seabrooks could manage an extraordinarily functional agricultural machine like Seabrook Farms is putting the question backwards. He wrote to me, quote, a family-owned business can enable a dysfunctional family to maintain its dysfunction for decades, over generations, even after the business is gone, resisting individuals' efforts to achieve healthier roles and relationships. He added, is the substance addiction a cause or a symptomatic result of family and business problems? In my experience, the business itself is usually the family's primary drug, and other dependents follow. That was definitely true of my family. Anyway, so should we open it up to questions on that, cherry notes?
Do folks have questions? Anyone would like to? Yeah, and can you either bellow or come forward to a mic?
Thank you. It was great presentation, great slides. Thank you. I have two questions. One is, what question would you ask your father if he was still living? When you were doing your research, what brick wall did you run into that you wish you could have asked? And the second question is, has your therapist read your book?
Well, that was my therapist is in the book. My therapist is a character in the book, so she definitely read the book. Therapy was actually a big help. Family systems, the kind of therapy that I got into, really was perfect for my particular questions about my role in the world and how it related to my family, because it sort of sees you in the system in relationship to your family members, and really helped me understand, a lot. So therapy is a huge part here. I'm a huge therapy advocate. What would I ask my dad if he was still here? I mean, one I didn't really get into. Yeah, my dad had Ava Gabor as his girlfriend, but his father decided he wanted Ava Gabor as his girlfriend. Yeah. His father basically tried to take his girlfriend, and he just let him. Ava Gabor threw him out, so he didn't have a chance to do that. But he never challenged his dad. He never confronted his dad. And why? How could this man be that so supremely powerful that when he tries to take your girlfriend, you don't even say something about it to him? I would like to know, Dad, what was going through your mind at that point. So that would be one thing.
Yeah, please.
Hi, thank you. It's very, very interesting. I'm somebody who saw this book, and I grew up in Cumberland County.
Oh, you did? Wow.
Yeah, and my parents actually were from Pennsylvania. My father was a primary care doctor and moved, so I didn't have roots there deeply. But I went to the local high school and knew, I think, Seabrooks and
Which high school did you go to?
Cumberland Regional
Oh yeah,
School.
yeah. I'm sure you went to Seabrooks.
Yeah, and I knew Seabrooks, and I wasn't until I got older and interested in that part of the world that is right in the Northeast, but very few people in the Northeast know anything about that county. I mean, if they know
Right.
Southern Jersey, they know Cape May or
Right.
things like that. My question is about, I look forward to reading the book, but I've always been interested in why, about basically the Black communities, that were part of Cumberland County, the Japanese communities. I never knew when I was growing up how they got there, or probably wasn't even interested, but got interested over time. So you touched a little bit in the announcement and your presentation, but how much more is in your book or in your thoughts about kind of how the farm, like what more about what labor and movement of labor happened in South Jersey affected the farm, and what can you say about today about how labor is moved? Because I know in that area now, labor for farms is primarily from Latin America, from South America.
Yeah, so one of the big contradictions, thanks for the question, one of the big contradictions in Seabrook Farms sort of nature was that it was always sort of sold as a mechanized farm, but it always needed more and more labor. It never, even though the mechanization was supposed to reduce labor, it never did. Because there was always places that you needed people. The whole chain wasn't mechanized. Finding labor, as I said earlier, was like in the 20th century when people are leaving farms for factories was a huge challenge. But one of the really cool things about this part about Seabrook, New Jersey was, it actually really was this very multicultural community, and the children who grew up there. So the parents arrived. A lot of the parents, particularly ones from the internment camps and the displaced persons camps, didn't have any idea what they were going to be living in. And when they got there, they realized that the accommodations were really no better than they had back in the camps. And now they had to pay rent for them. And then they had to work 12 hours a day. And the shifts, they would only be on the day shift for like 3 weeks, then they have to shift to the night shift. So sleep is always, disordered, and it was a very difficult life, but the parents ensured that the children didn't experience that feeling of hardship, and instead experienced this kind of utopian, multicultural, where the Japanese American kids, even during the Second World War, are playing with the black kids and playing with the Italian American kids. And for the Japanese workers who came to Seabrook while the war was still going on, this is, as you know, kind of not a particularly progressive place socially. Jim Crow was not far away, even in the 60s, from South Jersey. And yet, those folks were never harassed because the company said these are good people. And the company even sent Japanese Americans out to promote the company during the war, which was, kind of an extraordinary act. So a lot of those children who are now in our generation, are at my age, they're like me, finding out all the hardships that their parents went through, but they didn't know that as a child, and they thought it was kind of, their parents' experience was as, positive as their experience. And then I would say the Estonian community, and some of these, I don't know if you've been back recently, but there's still people there who, are Japanese American and Estonian, and there's still a community. The Seabrook Buddhist Temple is there. I spoke in the Seabrook Buddhist Temple. The Lutheran Church for the Estonians worship in is still there. All these separate sort of lifestyles and communities and rituals, folklores are still kind of part of this kind of remote area in South Jersey. So, and then there's a museum, and I was president of the museum for 3 or 4 years, and I always was trying to enact narrative reform. That was what I called it, narrative reform. Because if you go into the museum and you see it, you think this man C.S. Seabrook was, like Albert Schweitzer or something. I just felt we could have a little more nuance. But no, the other board members, all of whom were children of original working groups, would not hear of it, because that was not what their parents would have wanted. So down there, he's still a great man. Yeah, back there.
Hi, John.
Hi.
So I read it, and
Oh,
I
it was-
remember thinking, how are those kids responding to you? How are the kids of the workers who have lionized this, your grandfather, and they're sitting on the board of that museum, and that's their reason, for staying in Seabrook, perhaps?
Right.
How are they responding to the book? Are they engaging, or are you just gonna find out when you go down there?
No, actually, a lot of the workers, thankfully, Lisa's an old friend of mine too, a lot of the workers, family members have come to readings in New Jersey, and they're really just excited to know more about the place they grew up and have more context. I mean, I don't think anybody necessarily believed that CF was a saint, they knew that he was a very tough boss and did things the way he wanted to do them. So I think the revelations in the book aren't like so terribly shocking, and they, people I think are happy that this, like me, in writing the book, that this extraordinary experience that they had, which is hard to kind of communicate to people if you weren't there, now they can say, read this, this is kind of what it was like. And I can do the same thing, because I've been trying to explain my whole life, like, this was an unusual situation. And that's partly, I think, why you write, so that you can just refer people to the work and try to move on. But no, I've been heartened and surprised and kind of thrilled by how enthusiastic the response from the worker groups has been to the book. Yeah. In the back, yes.
Yes, I thought your comments about the issues and the survivability of large private corporations in the United States with respect to making it through 2 generations or 3 generations, very interesting.
Yeah.
I wondered if you could comment on the fact that in Europe, apparently, most large family corporations survive for generation
Yeah.
upon generation upon
That's right.
generation, and whether you have focused on what fundamental issues cause that to be the case versus in our country.
Yeah, it's true. You know, these Italian leather companies go back to the Middle Ages in some cases. I think the difference is that in America we value individual achievement and self-determination, finding your path above anything else. That's kind of the value that is inculcated in us as Americans, that it's up to us to sort of find our path, and our family can help us, but it's the individual that's the sort of the most important person. In Europe, I just don't think they have the same value system that I think individuals who come out of family businesses, a lot of people probably don't want to go and work for the family business, but either there's fewer opportunities or the stigma is greater, or it's just not even thinkable that you would leave your family business. But I think a lot of it has to do with our kind of American self-determination value, and if the business hadn't gone away and I had been given an opportunity to work for this company, I don't think I would have wanted to do it. But I don't know if that's an American thing or not, but I just felt like I had my own path to follow, and I just think that happens a lot in families, in American business families, and that explains why they don't last that long.
Thank you.
So I think we can, if you see more questions, or shall we?
We good?
Anybody else?
We got one more, and then.
I'm the bold guy.
Yeah. I had the remarkable opportunity of being a stable boy in the Seabrook stables back in Woodstock many years ago, and Jack Seabrook always presented himself as a very admirable and just incredible sort of representation of achievement or success.
Right.
And I wonder, John, are there things about your father? Was there a good man
also. I feel like were there moral threads or values that he did have that didn't feed into the business and family downfall, but that you came away from thinking, this is what my dad gave me that was good, or did that just not exist in him?
No, I mean, well, he was a hard worker. You know, he worked hard, and he dealt with adversity. I mean, he did lose his vocation and his father and, you know, his career when he was 41 years old. He found his feet in Philadelphia. Some of the people that he knew from business helped him there, and then he was a very brilliant businessman, so he quickly succeeded. But, you know, coming back, getting up off the floor and doing it again, I took a lot from that. He respected my mother. He treated my mother well. I think he learned from, you know, his previous romantic entanglements how to treat women and how not to treat women, and he always treated my mother with respect, and I took a lot from his treatment of her too. I mean, he had this kind of incredible sort of noblesse oblige, right? Like you saw it. He really did seem like almost like a prince. You know, he looked like it. He drove the horses, and I think there's some, even if that was for sort of reasons that had to do with being the top dog or always being the sort of, he was always like the smartest guy in the room. He had to be that person, you know. But if you could live with that and not like compete with it or feel challenged or threatened by it, there was a lot to learn from it. And maybe you got a little of that too. So, you know, I mean, in a way, this book is kind of a love letter to my dad. People have said that to me, and I feel that way about it. And it certainly ends that way. So I hope the readers can see the good in him. And what wasn't good in him wasn't necessarily really all his fault. You know, it was how he learned from his father. Yeah.
John Seabrook, thank you very much.